Hello everyone, today we're going to be going over the August 2024 Living Environment Regents Exam. In this video we're going to be focusing on Part A, which are the first 30 multiple choice questions. Please note that this video is a part of a bigger series where I go over every single question and part from the 2024 Living Environment Regents Exam. A link to videos going over Part B1, B2, C, and D, which are all of the parts of this test, can be found in the description of this video. So if you want to skip to a specific part, or if you want to keep on going over this test after this video ends, all of the links are going to be found right there. That being said, we're going to start off with number 1, which says that the human body maintains a balanced internal environment. In order to accomplish this, what needs to happen? Well, this balanced internal environment is a result of homeostasis, right? Homeostasis is our body trying to balance its temperature, trying to balance the nutrients inside of it, trying to balance all of the various levels which we need to survive. And that's primarily done through our body being stimulated via stimuli and our body taking actions to react to that stimuli, which is choice 4. For example, a big part of homeostasis is balancing internal body temperature. If you're too cold, the temperature is a stimuli, and it triggers your body to shiver to generate warmth. If you're too hot, then that environmental stimuli triggers your body to sweat to cool itself down. Choice 1 is false because organelles work together to keep the cell alive. Choice 2 is false because no, all cells do not have the same shape and function. Think about a sex cell, think about a sperm cell and a liver cell. Well, the function of a liver cell is to filter out your blood, and the function of a sperm cell is to fertilize an egg cell and carry on your genetic information. And you can see that these two do not have the same shape, so no, not all cells have the same shape and function. In choice 3, that's just incorrect, right? Insulin is not produced when protein levels are low. Insulin is produced when blood sugar is high. 2. Wolves are important predators in some ecosystems. If wolves are removed from their environment, the ecosystem is in danger of becoming unstable due to a reduction of autotrophs when the number of herbivores is not kept in check by the wolves. This first answer choice is the correct one. In an ecosystem, let's say that we have autotrophs, which are plants, and those plants are grasses. Let's say we just have a bunch of grass, and those grasses are eaten by deers. So deers eat this, and wolves eat the deers. Okay? So, in this case, if the population of the wolves decrease, there's no one to keep the population of the deers in check. So the deer population will skyrocket because their predator no longer exists. And if there are a lot of deers, then they're going to eat all of the grass, and the autotroph population will begin to decrease to a low level. I said autotroph because grasses and plants are autotrophic and autotrophs, while the deers are the herbivores that eat them. So herbivores need to have predators. If they don't have predators, they will overgraze and eat all of the autotrophs and all of the plants in a given environment. Okay? Choice 2 is false. A decrease in number of herbivores will, because they will not be able to reach carrying capacity. Carrying capacity is this natural limit of the size of an environment. But decreasing the wolves would actually lead to an increase in the number of herbivores. The wolves kill herbivores, so if you decrease the amount of wolves, there's less killing of herbivores, which means their population has to go up. 3, an increase in biodiversity. That's going to be false because biodiversity is the number of species present. If you get rid of all the wolves, you're getting rid of a species, which makes it less diverse. 4, some species of herbivores taking over the niche that wolves occupied. This is also false because when have you ever seen a deer or a cow, turn into a carnivore and start to eat other deers, cows, or other animals? That's not what happens. 3 says, which statement best describes how deforestation, that is the result of forest fires, can contribute to global warming? So the burning of trees adds smoke to the atmosphere and blocks sunlight. Well, if you're blocking sunlight, wouldn't that cool down the globe? Yeah, it would, right? The whole reason why a lot of extinction events happen when asteroids strike is when the asteroid hits the Earth, it releases a lot of smoke into the air. It causes wildfires that release a lot of smoke into the air, and that smoke creates a layer, a very thick and impenetrable layer around the Earth, which blocks the rays of the sun from reaching the world. And it's just absorbed in this layer, and it never actually reaches the world, or the Earth, or the center, or the ground, and you have this freeze over event, right, where everything turns really cold. 2 says that burning the trees adds carbon dioxide to the atmosphere. Now this is true, right? If we were adding smoke to block the sunlight, we would be getting colder. Think about it. If you're walking on a street, you're walking in the shade. The shade is always cooler than walking in the direct sunlight. So if you are blocking the sunlight, you're making the world colder. But if you're releasing carbon dioxide, which is a greenhouse gas, into the environment, you're making the environment hotter. That's what happens, right? Burning is a combustion reaction, so it's releasing CO2. That CO2 gets trapped inside of our atmosphere and pretty much keeps the rays of the sun. Let's say that this black line is the atmosphere, this green line is the earth, right? It keeps that heat from the sun trapped inside of our atmosphere. It can no longer go back into space. The CO2 forms this nice little shield that warms our globe, right? And leads to global warming, which is really bad for the environment. Okay, 3, deforestation removes trees that produce CO2. Trees don't produce CO2. Deforestation immediately increases ecosystem stability. It doesn't. Remember that any decrease in biodiversity makes an environment less stable. Trees are a species. If you burn down all the trees in the environment, you're decreasing the amount of species, which decreases the biodiversity and decreases its stability. Not choice 4, but number 4 says, for centuries, humans have built dams along rivers to redirect water for powering irrigation and transportation. Dams can prevent migrating fish from swimming upstream to reproduce. It can also disrupt the flow of sediments and nutrients. Communities are starting to eliminate some dams, and the health of the river ecosystem is being restored. This illustrates that technological advances often have environmental trade-offs. I think choice 1 is the correct answer here, because a dam is a technological advancement. Dams can produce us energy, right? They can provide us with a lot of hydro energy, right? Water can spin a wheel, and that wheel can give us clean energy. But a drawback or a cost of that new clean energy is the fact that they can prevent migrating fish from swimming upstream to reproduce, and they could also disrupt the flow of sediments, right? So technological advances like dams often involve environmental trade-offs. Choice 2 is wrong because when humans modify their environment, it always has effects that cannot be reversed. This is false. This blurb proves that to be false because communities are starting to eliminate some dams and the health of the river ecosystem is being restored. So yes, when humans modify their environment, it can be reversed. It's not always irreversible, like choice 2 says. 3, industrialization has a positive effect on the health of river ecosystems. That's false, right? Industrialization often has a negative impact on river ecosystems. Choice 4 says that the construction of dams affected abiotic factors in rivers, but not biotic factors. This is also false. Remember that abiotic factors are non-living, and biotic factors are living, right? So yes, there were some abiotic factors, like the sediment. Sediment is dirt and clay in the water that settles to the bottom. That's abiotic. That's not alive. But what about the migrating fish that swim upstream? They're alive. That's a biotic factor that the construction of a dam affected. So number 5 says that in humans, lactose is broken down into glucose and galactose in the presence of a particular enzyme. It is most likely that the enzyme that breaks down lactose does what? Well, it's most likely that it's not involved in other types of reactions because enzymes are specific. Okay? That is a very, very important property of enzymes that everyone needs to remember. Enzymes are very specific to one function. That's because every single chemical reaction is unique, and every single chemical reaction generally has an enzyme associated with it that aids in that specific reaction, okay? So again, the answer here has to be 4 because enzymes are always specific. 3, helps in the synthesis of complex sugars during autotrophic nutrition. Again, this is false because humans are not autotrophs. Humans do not have autotrophic nutrition. So the enzymes that we have are not fitted for the enzymes that autotrophs have when they're undergoing autotrophic nutrition. We undergo heterotrophic nutrition. So our enzymes are going to be geared towards heterotrophic nutrition. They're not involved in autotrophic nutrition. 2 is involved in other reactions when the temperature and pH is ideal. Again, one enzyme usually has one specific function, so it's not involved in other types of reactions. 1 breaks down several other types of food in the stomach. Choice 1 is also false because, again, enzymes are very specific. Okay. Number 6 says the Tdap vaccine can protect adolescents and adults from serious bacterial diseases such as tetanus, diphtheria, and pertussis. Another vaccine called TD protects against tetanus and diphtheria, but not pertussis. TD does not protect against pertussis because the Tdap vaccine is given to treat pertussis. Well, again, a vaccine isn't given to treat an illness. A vaccine is given to prevent that illness from infecting you. So choice 1 is automatically false, right? Again, vaccines are to prevent you from getting diseases in the future. They're not to treat it. TD vaccine does not contain the antibodies from the pertussis to fight the bacteria. Vaccines do not help you fight bacteria. Vaccines give you protection from viruses. Vaccine, virus, they both have a V as their first letter, okay? So this has nothing to do with bacteria. 3, Tdap vaccine contains a small amount of the bacteria that causes pertussis. Again, Tdap vaccines do not have anything to do with bacteria, right? Vaccines either contain a weakened portion of the virus or antigens of the virus. So either it contains a very weakened and dead version of the virus, or it contains parts of the virus that stimulates your immune system to say, hey, this guy doesn't belong here. But because it's weakened, or it's only certain parts of the virus, it's not actually going to cause you to get sick. Right? You're introducing a very tiny amount of the virus into your body so that your body can kill it off and write it down and remember how to kill it in the future, which is choice 4. The TD vaccine does not stimulate the immune system to recognize pertussis antigens, okay? So in this case, antigens are parts of the virus. So in order for your immune system to be stimulated and give you immunity, it needs to be stimulated by that specific virus. So this TD does not protect against pertussis because it doesn't even contain any part of the pertussis virus. Okay, 7 says that pelagic red crabs live in the ocean floor, have been found to eat small bits of plastic. When they are consumed, these creatures are passing the plastic along the food chain to predators, including fish consumed by humans. This is a concern because, 1, it decreases plastic recycling by primary consumers. This doesn't make sense, right? It decreases plastic recycling by primary consumers. This has nothing to do with recycling plastics. This plastic ended up in the ocean. It was polluted. It wasn't even recycled. 2, increases the risk of harmful substances in our food supply. This is true. Think about it. If these small crabs are eaten by tuna, right? A tuna can eat like 100 of these small crabs a day. And if each one of these small crabs has like a gram of plastic inside of them, that tuna is going to have 100 grams of plastic inside of it. And when it ends up in your tuna salad, you're going to be eating plastic. So this is increasing harmful substances inside of the food supply, right? And plastic is harmful for you. If you eat it, it's going to make you sick. 3, decreases in choice 3 is wrong because it's not decreasing producers in the ecosystem. These guys are just eating plastic now, which would probably help producers in the ecosystem. If these guys were eating producers beforehand, now that they're eating plastic, the producers are probably going to increase in number. 4, increase the biodiversity of the ocean. Again, no species is being removed here. It's an issue because whenever we eat their predators, we eat the predators of this crab, and whatever harmful substances this crab has, they pass it to their predators, and when we eat their predators, they pass it to us. 8 says that duckweed is a small plant that grows on the surface of still bodies of water. Over a 9-week period, scientists monitored the growth of duckweed in 3 ditches located on the same farm. The number of duckweed plants increased rapidly during weeks 1 and 2. After 2 weeks, each ditch was completely covered with a layer of duckweed and remained covered for several weeks. Okay? A valid conclusion based on this data collected over the 9-week study is that choice 1, animals that eat the duckweed have the greatest effect on duckweed population size. Well, that's not what happened, right? Over a 9-week period, scientists monitored the growth of the duckweed, right? And the number of duckweed plants increased rapidly during the weeks 1 and 2, and after 2 weeks, each ditch was completely covered. So if each ditch was completely covered for 7 weeks, if this is a body of water, and it's covered by this duckweed, let's say that's in the yellow, no one is eating that duckweed if it's still covered for 7 other weeks. 2, duckweed populations die off after completing a 2-week life cycle in the ditch. That's also false because if the duckweed really died out, then it would decompose and it would be gone by the remaining 7 weeks. At the end of the 7 weeks, there should be no duckweed left because it would be decomposed and dead. But the duckweed is still alive because it's clearly supporting itself and regenerating itself, which is why they still cover that film on top of the ditch, right? So choice 2 is out. 3, only changes in temperature affect duckweed population. No part of this question ever mentioned temperature, so we can't assume that affects population size. And 4, the size of the duckweed population is kept stable by limited resources in the ditch, which makes sense, right? The ditch has a carrying capacity. There's so many resources that there's a limited amount of resources that the duckweed can eat. After 2 weeks, the duckweed stops growing because it ate all of the resources there. It can't continue to reproduce because if it reproduces and the population grows even bigger, they'll just starve each other. And this is true about almost every single environment. There's a certain carrying capacity in which, after a certain point, the population has to remain underneath a specific level, because if it goes above it, they will eat up all the resources in the environment and starve, right? So they just reach their carrying capacity after 2 weeks. Number 9 says, which statement explains why the organisms in some ecosystems, such as rainforests, deserts, and oceans, are different from one another? Well, each ecosystem contains different physical conditions that determine the type of living organisms present there, right? So why are organisms on land and in the water different? Well, in the water, you need to be good at swimming. On the land, you need to be good at running and walking, or walking on all fours. Why? So why do fish look different than humans, or let's say cheetahs? Because each ecosystem contains different physical conditions. One is underwater, one is above water. And because one is underwater, you need fins. Because one is above water, you need, feet or legs. Choice 1, living organisms in each ecosystem have different needs that produce physical conditions. So no, the needs that they have do not produce the physical conditions that they require. I do not produce the physical conditions I require. I can adapt to my environment. Choice 2 is wrong because each ecosystem contains different types of living organisms that change each of the physical presence there. Also false, right? Fish don't change how wet the water is. Cheetahs don't change how hot the savanna is, right? Living organisms don't change each of the physical conditions there. They react to the physical conditions given. 3, they all have the same physical conditions present, but when the living organisms use them in different ways. Also false, right? Not animals living in rainforests, deserts, and oceans have different physical conditions. They don't have the same physical conditions. Oceans are wet, deserts are very dry. 10, some green plants secrete acids that dissolve rock, which makes it possible for plants to absorb phosphorus needed for the healthy plant growth. In addition to phosphorus, plants require many other substances. Which substances are required for the production of carbohydrates in green plants? So carbohydrates are sugars, and you should remember that photosynthesis... Oh, didn't mean to do that, but photosynthesis produces sugar, and photosynthesis needs H2O plus CO2 plus sunlight plus water. Okay? So it's not going to be oxygen that you need. It's not going to be carbon and glucose that you need because it produces a glucose, which is sugar. It's going to be carbon dioxide and water. So choice 10 has to be 3. Remember that carbohydrates are sugar. In order for a plant to produce sugar, it needs to undergo photosynthesis. And in order to undergo photosynthesis, you need to combine water with carbon dioxide, with sunlight, and it produces that sugar. That's pretty much, it's asking you what are the ingredients for sugar, right? Or what are the ingredients required in photosynthesis. Number 11 says, which statement about the competition in ecosystems is correct? Choice 1, organisms compete when most when they occupy different niches and resources are plentiful. This is false. The reason why organisms have to compete over resources is when they don't have enough for themselves, right? You're competing with another organism over food when there's not enough food between the two of you to share. Choice 2, individuals need not compete because resources such as water and food are always plentiful in ecosystems. This is false. The amount of water in an ecosystem is limited. The amount of food in an ecosystem is also limited. It's not always plentiful. 3, organisms that compete successfully will survive, reproduce, and pass their traits on to their offspring. This is true, right? Organisms that successfully compete, aka the organisms that get all of the resources from an environment successfully, are going to be able to survive because they're the ones that get these resources that they needed. The organisms that fail to compete are not going to get the resources that they need, and they're going to starve and not be able to survive to pass on their traits. Choice 4 says that competition usually results in the extinction of a species, ensuring the survival of other species. Not necessarily true. 2 species can compete but still survive. It doesn't mean that one is going to be extinct or not. 12. Human body systems interact with one another. The list below illustrates the results of one body system functioning normally. Muscle cells receive oxygen, nerve cells receive glucose, lungs get rid of carbon dioxide, and some gland cells send chemical signals to organs. Which body system most directly enables all of these functions to occur, right? So which body system is going to be responsible for all of this? And that's going to be the circulatory system, right? How are all of these connected? Well, they're all connected through a network of blood vessels, right? These blood vessels are going to carry oxygen to muscle cells. They're going to carry sugar to the nerve cells. They're going to carry carbon dioxide out of the lungs or into the lungs so that the lungs can get out of it. And they're going to carry the chemical signals to the organs, right? The circulatory system is this network of wires, aka your veins, that carry oxygen, CO2, signaling molecules, sugars, and other nutrients needed for certain parts of your body to work. All right, the excretory system only gets rid of waste. It doesn't carry products that you need, such as oxygen and glucose. The digestive system will produce glucose, but it won't carry oxygen or get rid of carbon dioxide. And the immune system will only send chemical signals to organs. It won't carry oxygen or receive glucose. 13. The Himalayan rabbit lives in the cold Tibetan mountains. It typically has white fur on its body and black fur on its outer extremities, such as the ears, nose, feet, and tail. Scientists shaved a patch of white fur off the Himalayan rabbit and applied an ice pack to the area for 30 minutes. The fur in the shaved area grew in black. The best explanation for why the fur grew in the shaved area is what? So in this case, that answer is going to be 4. Warm and cold temperatures activate different genes of the fur color, right? Himalayan rabbits live in the cold Tibetan mountains. It typically has a white fur on its body. So when in the cold, it's going to produce white fur and black fur on its outer extremities, such as the ears, nose, feet, and tail. So this black fur is where the rabbit comes in contact with the cold the most, right? This top of the rabbit isn't really going to come into the contact with cold, but its feet that are always going to be on the snow surface are going to come in contact with the cold, and because they come in contact with the cold, they're going to change color, right? They're going to grow as black, and this exact same concept is applied in this experiment, right? An ice pack was applied to a shaved area for 30 minutes. So because the skin was stimulated by a cold environment, the patch of fur that grew back was black. So that tells us that cold weather stimulates the animal, in this case the rabbit, to produce different coats or different colors of coat. So warm and cold temperatures activate different genes for fur color. Okay, fur color is definitely going to be a gene, and certain genes can be activated and deactivated by the environment. That's called an epigenetic factor. 3. The ice pack caused a mutation. That's false. That's highly unlikely. If it was a UV ray, then yes, but an ice pack that's just cold, no, that doesn't cause mutations. 2. The fur in the newly shaved area was younger than the white fur on the rest of the body. That's false, because in this case, the black fur never changed to white. All right. Choice 1, the food that the rabbit ate during the experiment influenced the color. They talked nothing about the fur color. Okay. Also, the rabbit is born without fur and then grows its fur over time. So if choice 2 had to be correct, then the entire rabbit would either have to be black or white. Okay, so time has nothing to do with the color, the change in color, right? All of the fur is grown at the same time, so all of the fur should be the same color if time had an impact on the color of the fur. Okay. 14 says that researchers have identified a mutually beneficial relationship between some plant species and specific fungi. The fungi increase the nutrient uptake for the plants, and the plants provide nutrition for the fungi. In order for this relationship to occur, the plant must produce a particular protein. Scientists hope to enable plants that normally do not interact with these fungi to obtain the benefits that plant-fungi relationship offers. In order to make this possible, which process would the scientists most likely use? So here's the thing, right? When a plant interacts with a fungi, they have this beneficial relationship where the fungi provide nutrition. So the fungi release these certain proteins which provide protection for the plants against certain diseases, and in exchange the plants secrete some sugar to feed the fungi. So how would we want to recreate this? Would we want to treat the plants with chemical fertilizers to stimulate their growth? Well, no, right? This has nothing to do with fertilizers. If we want to make this relationship possible, right? If we want to make the plants get the proteins from the fungi and the plants provide the fungi with food, what do fertilizers have to do with that? 2, provide the fungi with the same molecular bases that are found in the plant protein. Again, the fungi are the ones that give the plant the protein. So it has nothing to do with the plants giving the fungi protein. The fungi give the plant some protein. 3, identify the gene that codes for the protein and introduce it into plant cells by genetic engineering. This is true, right? These mushrooms, these fungi, have some sort of protein that they emit if they're producing a protein, it has to be within their genetic blueprint. The DNA is this blueprint that allows certain parts of the fungi to make more or less of itself, right? So in this case, we want to copy that blueprint directly from that fungi and implant it into the blueprint of the plant so that the plant can read that blueprint and produce those proteins on its own. Selectively breeding a new type of fungus that does not require the nutrients that the plant provide. This doesn't make sense because we want the plants to be able to produce the protein on their own. We don't need the fungus to produce the protein more. We need the plants to produce it, okay? 15 says that milkweeds are plants that produce toxic, bitter tasting chemicals. Some insects have developed the ability to safely feed on milkweed. They accumulate the toxin on their bodies, causing them to taste bitter to other animals that may try to eat them. As a result, most animals avoid eating these insects. A possible explanation for this relationship is that, choice 1, eating a toxic plant increases the ability of these insects to survive and reproduce. Okay? So if they eat a toxic plant, the toxic stuff inside of their body increases their ability to survive because other animals won't eat these animals that are deemed toxic, right? If a bird eats this insect that is full of milkweed, then the bird will get sick, and the bird will eventually learn not to eat that specific type of insect, okay? 16 says, which type of cell engulfs pathogens and marks them for killing? That's going to be a white blood cell. That's called phagocytosis, okay? The white blood cell comes around, it opens up, and it engulfs a pathogen. The engulf means surrounds, so the pathogen is now inside of the white blood cell, and then it dissolves the white blood cell inside of it. Sorry, it dissolves the pathogen inside of the white blood cell. 17 says, which choice below completes the diagram with the correctly labeled definition for of the box labeled X. So this is going to be a mitochondria, because it's this tube-shaped organism that has these folds on the inside of it. This mitochondria is a part of a cell, which is a part of X, which is a part of an organ, which is a part of a biological unit. So this is a organelle, this is a cell, this is a unknown thing, this is an organ, and this is a biological unit. Okay, so you should be thinking about the organization of life, right? Life organizes itself from least complex to most complex. So a group of organelles is called a cell, a group of organelles is called a tissue, and a group of tissues is called an organ, and a group of organs is called a biological unit or an animal, right? So it's a tissue, which is a group of cells with similar structures and functions, okay? So these are all intestinal cells, okay? In organ system, this is not an organ system. A bunch of these organs would be an organ system. 2, an organ is a group of tissues with a common function. It's not an organ because it goes organelle, cell, tissue, organ, okay? So in order to complete this hierarchy, you need a tissue here. 18, concern is rising that mass extinctions of many species may increase. The graph below, the risk of extinctions is shown to have rapidly risen from 1850 to 2014. This loss of different species is a concern because it may, choice 1, lead to an increase in diversity in the ecosystem. Well, that's false because a decrease in the amount of species would decrease the diversity, right? Diversity is the amount of different species that you have within an environment. Extinction decreases the amount of species, which decreases the diversity. 2, impact the energy flow and food supply within an ecosystem. This is going to be the correct answer because each specific species has a specific role that it plays inside of the ecosystem. Autotrophs, like grasses, the role that they play is that they produce their own food and thus produce the energy for the herbivores that eat them, right? So if the autotrophs die off, all the grass dies off, then the heterotrophs and the producers, like the deer and the elephants that eat the grass and the trees, are also going to die off because they're starving, okay? So remember that the loss of different species impacts the energy and food supply within an ecosystem, okay? The more animals that die out, the smaller the food source for some animals, and sometimes those animals won't even have a food source, which makes them go extinct, okay? 4, provide additional sources of potential medicines. Again, that makes no sense because if you don't have new species, how are you going to provide new medicine or anything? And it's not going to produce increased non-renewable resources either, right? Because if you want to produce new oil or new gas, that takes millions of years under high pressure underground, okay? 19 says the American Museum of Natural History has an exhibit called the Ecosystem Sphere. It is a huge glass globe that was assembled in 1999. Populations of algae, bacteria, and little shrimp were sealed with water and air inside. The ecosystem is kept in a well-lit area. Although the sphere has never been opened, groups of each kind of organisms are still alive inside of it. The most likely reason for this is because the populations have what? 1. Remained in separate areas of the spheres and do not interact. This is false because in an ecosystem, almost all of the organisms there have a role and interact with one another. 2. Adapted so that they do not require food. This is false. Every single type of organism requires some sort of energy and food. You cannot evolve to not require food. 3. A constant source of energy. The populations have a constant source of energy because they cannot recycle gases and materials. This is false because if they had a constant source of energy, they would be able to recycle the gases and materials. They do not have the constant source of energy because they cannot do this. They have a constant source of energy because they recycle the gases and materials inside of the biosphere, right? All of the water is, taken up by the heterotrophs and then released back into the ecosystem after they die, which the plants absorb, and then they get the water from eating the plants. So here's the thing: the constant source of energy is because everything in an environment is going to be recycled, right? The flow of energy is always constant. Energy cannot be created or destroyed, right? So if it starts at one point, it's going to be recycled and end up where it started. So number 20 talks about Ebola. It says that it's a deadly viral disease. Victims of Ebola suffer from massive blood loss and organ failure. Researchers are testing a vaccine on people who have not yet been infected by Ebola but live in high-risk areas. The vaccine must be given to subjects before exposure to the Ebola virus because vaccines stimulate the subject's immune system to react to future exposure to the virus. The whole point of a vaccine is to expose you to the virus so that you don't have to get sick from it. If you already got sick from the virus beforehand, then you already got exposed to the virus and you already have immunity to it, okay? So the whole point of a vaccine is to get people exposed to the virus without actually having to get them sick, okay? If you're exposed to the virus, a weakened part of the virus, which is usually what a vaccine provides you with, then your body will have the knowledge to fight off the real deal, or the real fully strong virus when you encounter it in nature. And because your body can fight off the virus, you won't get sick from it, okay? Choice 4 is wrong because many vaccines are effective for a lifetime. Choice 2 is wrong because it doesn't destroy the vaccine. If you're exposed to a virus, your immune system will destroy the virus because the vaccine gave it the knowledge on how to do so. The virus does not destroy a vaccine. 1, the vaccine will mutate the virus. That's also false. 21, a relatively large number of antibodies in a blood sample would mostly indicate that there is 21 would be A, infection in the body, right? So antibodies are these special cells that your immune system produces. They look like a triangle or an upside down Y, and they are highly specific to certain viruses, right? They bind to viruses or pathogens and they destroy them. So if there's a lot of antibodies in your blood, that means that you probably have an infection inside of your body, okay? Antibodies are only produced in the case of an infection, when your body is infected with something and it needs to fight off whatever's infecting it. So if you have COVID, the way of testing whether you have COVID or not, if they run a blood test on you, which is generally not normal, but if they run a blood test on you and they see that you have a lot of COVID-19 antibodies, that means that you're fighting off a COVID-19 infection because your body is producing these COVID killer cells, these cells that are really good at killing COVID cells. 2, a mutation has nothing to do with antibodies. 3, a deficiency of carbon dioxide in the circulatory system. Your circulatory system actually wants to get rid of carbon dioxide, so this doesn't make any sense. 4, an insufficient amount of specific vitamin in the diet. Antibodies have nothing to do with your vitamins. 22 says that UV light can alter the DNA segments of genes in the skin cells of an individual. Which one of these statements best describes the direct result of these alterations? Any cells produced from these altered skin cells will have the same alterations. That is true, right? Remember that cells undergo mitosis. Body cells undergo mitosis, which produces identical copies. So if this cell suddenly had a mutation in its DNA which changed the color of its cell membrane to red, mitosis is going to make a copy of that DNA and a copy of that cell. So now you're going to be left with 2 cells that have that original change reflected in their composition, right? So that's the issue with mitosis. Cells that undergo mitosis are always going to carry on that mutation into their identical offspring, right? These offspring are a direct copy of their parent. So they're going to contain that same mutation inside of themselves, okay? All offspring with the same individual have the same skin cell alterations. This UV light doesn't just apply to skin cells, it's any cells, right? These alterations will spread to other cells in the body. That's not true. Why? Because the mutation is the only people that are affected by the mutation are the offspring of that original mutated cell. And it's not just skin cells, it's any cell. 4, the sex cells in the individual will have the same alteration. This is also false because if the skin cells are mutated, that doesn't mean that the sex cells will be mutated. If the sex cells were exposed to UV radiations as well, then yes, they would be altered. But again, just because one of your cells is altered doesn't mean that all of your cells are altered. Remember, your body is divided into specific types of cells. So if your skin cells were the ones that got exposed to UV light, then they will be the ones that will be altered. But just because one type of cells are altered doesn't mean that all cells will be altered. Okay. 23 says that the energy required to assemble proteins and fats is directly supplied to the body from what? From 20. So it's going to be choice 1. All colors of visible light. No, the energy required to assemble proteins and fats directly supplied to the body cells is from molecules of ATP contained within the cells. Remember that the unit of energy in life is going to be adenosine triphosphate, ATP. That's all of the energy. Okay? All colors of visible light. All colors of visible light is what plants use to produce sugars, and they then turn those sugars into ATP. All DNA found in sex cells, and DNA do not have anything to do with energy production. 4 molecules of CO2 produced by chloroplasts. Again, chloroplasts do not produce CO2. Chloroplasts take CO2 in order to produce sugar. Okay, so again, answer choice 2 is going to be the correct answer here because molecules of ATP contained within the cells. ATP is this unit of energy. It's the way that we store chemical energy, and we use it to produce or to power biological functions in the cell. Okay, so 24 says that there's over 200 types of different types of cells in the human body. Each cell type is specialized to carry out a particular function, but they all develop from the same single cell. This is because each type of cell is going to express some genes not expressed in the other types of cell. So all of your cells have the exact same DNA, right? They have the same blueprint, but they read different types of the blueprint. So for example, your liver cells are really good at filtering your blood, whilst your lung cells are really good your liver cells are really good at filtering different things from your blood than your lung cells do, right? Your lung cells filter out the carbon dioxide, your liver cells, filter out the alcohol and all the other waste that's not CO2. So they still contain the same blueprint. In humans, they still have all 46 chromosomes inside of this blueprint. But those lung cells are only reading, this specific part of the DNA, while the liver cells are reading this specific part of the blueprint or that specific part of the DNA. So the reason why we have so many different cell types is because each type of cell expresses some genes that are not expressed in different types in other cells. So if these are all of the lung cell genes, then the lung cells are going to read only this part of your genetic information, the part that codes for the lung cells, and the liver cells are only going to read this part of the blueprint or this part of the DNA because that's the part that codes for them. Okay, so again, you need to remember that every single body cell has the same amount of DNA, it's just expressed differently. Okay, choice 4 is the opposite of what I just said, right? Again, all the genes, every single gene is found in every single cell. It's just expressed differently. 2, destroys the genes found in other types of cell. Genes are not destroyed unless they're mutated, which is not normal. And 1, this is because each type of cell contains different genes from other types of cell. Again, that's false. We all have the same amount of genes. Okay? 25 says coral reefs are vital components of marine ecosystems. They provide shelter and nutrition to many organisms that live on or in them. Some coral reefs in the Pacific Ocean are heavily polluted with plastic objects that provide surfaces where disease-causing microbes can grow. Here we have a photo with a plastic fork. Plastics like this fork can boost the disease of risk at coral reefs. If the amount of plastic present on coral reefs continues to increase, it is likely that the coral will adapt to the presence of plastic and thrive. Well, no. Right? The plastic is a breeding ground for bacteria. The bacteria will overpower the coral reef, and all of the coral reefs will die. So they're not going to magically adapt. That will take many generations, but by the time that they would have adapted, the bacteria just would have killed all of them off. 2, microbes will adapt to living directly on the coral. That's false, right? The microbes will still live on the plastic and then spread to the coral, right? It has nothing to do with the microbes evolving. 3. Algae that live on the reef will begin to decompose the dying coral. That has nothing to do with anything in the situation. We're talking about bacteria, not algae here. So choice 4 has to be the correct answer. Species dependent on the coral will be negatively impacted. That makes sense. The diseases are killing off this coral, right? The bacteria from this fork and then going onto this coral and killing it. And because this coral is now dead, animals that use it for shelter or animals that feed off of the coral are also going to be negatively impacted because their source of food is now gone. Number 26 says that enzymes, antibodies, and receptor molecules all have different functions. However, they are alike in that they do what? Well, all of them have a shape that is specific to their functions. Receptor molecules, have a specific shape so that the molecule that they receive, either this triangle or this square, fits into them and carries a specific signal. Enzymes have a specific shape so that the substrates or the things that bond to them or that they bond to alter can fit there, right? Enzymes are highly specific. That specificity is carried by their shape. Receptors are highly specific. That specificity is carried by their shape. So yeah. They're not all involved in cellular respiration. They're not all classified as carbohydrates, which are sugars, and they're not important in animals but plants. They are important in animals and plants, right? It's not just limited to animals. They're all important. 27 said that Australian quolls are endangered mammals. One factor causing the death of many quolls is that they occasionally consume cane toads, which are poisonous. Scientists have identified a gene that some quolls possess that make them avoid eating cane toads. By selectively breeding quolls with the toad-avoiding gene with other quolls that lack this gene, scientists found that all of the hybrid offspring inherited the surviving gene. Before the survival gene could be passed on to any offspring, the genetic material present in the parent with the toad-avoiding gene would have to be what? Well, they're pretty much asking you, how did this toad-avoiding gene come about? And it had to be accurately replicated, right? So before the survival gene could be passed on to any offspring, the genetic material present in the parent with the toad-avoiding gene would have to be accurately replicated, right? Replication and sexual reproduction requires sperm and eggs, right? So these cells need to be replicated and produced accurately in order for them to actually carry your genetic information first, right? They need to each carry 50% of that genetic blueprint so that when they combine, their blueprints can combine into one solid blueprint that will then be used to produce a brand new animal, right? Or their offspring, okay? So they're asking you, well, in order for this gene to even be passed on, what needs to happen? Well, in order for this gene to be passed on, the cells that carry genes, the sex cells, need to actually be formed first. So they need to be accurately replicated. You don't need to genetically engineer something because your body naturally produces sex cells. It doesn't need to be changed through recombination and does not need to be mutated to become a different gene. If it was mutated to become a different gene, then they would no longer have the toad-avoiding gene and it wouldn't even be passed on to begin with. 28 says that scientists have cloned many animals such as cows, sheep, and chickens from a single cell. Which natural process is most similar to this cloning technique? That's going to be asexual reproduction, right? Asexual reproduction is when you have one cell that directly replicates into two identical cells. Cloning is identical, right? Cloning produces identical copies. So if you're cloning something that's most closely related to asexual reproduction. Mutations, gametes, and genetic recombination are all things that produce variation or changes. Okay? And because you're producing changes, you're not going to produce identical copies or clones. Okay? 29 says, within a sexually reproducing species, the correct chromosome number is maintained by choice 1, having the chromosome number in gamete production followed by fertilization, doubling the chromosome number in gamete production followed by fertilization, having the chromosome number during mitosis followed by differentiation, doubling the chromosome number during mitosis followed by differentiation. So the chromosome number does not change during mitosis, okay? It stays constant, right? Mitosis produces two identical copies of the same cell. So if this cell has 3 chromosomes and 3 organelles, the cells that are produced are also going to be identical, which means that they also have to have the 3 chromosomes and the 3 organelles, okay? So also, we're talking about a sexually reproducing species. A sexually reproducing species is not going to undergo mitosis to reproduce, it's going to undergo sexual reproduction and meiosis, which is going to deal with gamete formation. So during a gamete formation, those gametes are called haploid because they contain 50% of the genetic information, aka they contain half of the chromosomes. Okay, the chromosomes are your genetic information. So in a human, the sperm carries 23 chromosomes and the egg also carries 23 chromosomes, and they combine to form a fertilized egg that has all 46 chromosomes. So which choice represents that? Well, it's going to be choice 1. It halves the chromosome numbers in gametes. So the gametes aren't going to have 46 chromosomes, they're going to have 23 chromosomes. And then fertilization is going to combine these two halves to form the normal amount of chromosomes that you need. Doubling the chromosomes in gamete production is going to make you have 46 chromosomes in the sperm and 46 chromosomes in the egg, which means that your offspring is born with 92 chromosomes, which is way too much. That's not a normal human, right? So the last question here is going to be that the ability of sea otters to find food can be reduced because the environment where they search for food is often dark and murky. It has been recently discovered that the surface of otters' paws are able to quickly detect a difference in 1/4 of a millimeter when comparing the size of objects, including food sources. So their paws are very, very good at detecting the shapes and sizes of very small objects, okay? The special characteristics of the otter's paws can best be described as an adaptation that could provide an advantage over other organisms that they compete with over food, right? So because they're able to detect the shapes in their food more reliably than other organisms, then they will have an advantage, right? Any special feature of an organism is generally an advantage that they adapted over many generations to help them survive, right? That's all of the 30 multiple choice questions from part A in one video. If you'd like to continue going over this test, please check the link in the description. It has all of the other parts from this exam. If you have any questions from this, please let me know in the comments down below. I'll try to get to them as quickly as possible. If you want me to go over another test, please suggest what I should go over next. Other than that, I hope you guys learned something and I hope you have a nice day.